Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Gopi Jana Ballava Giri Bharadhare. Gopi Jana Ballava Giri Bharadhare. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yamunatira Vanachare. Yamunatira Vanachare. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Gopi Jana Ballava Giri Bharadhare. Gopi Jana Ballava Giri Bharadhare. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yamunatira Vanachare. Yamunatira Vanachare. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Nishtavad Paramahansa Parivrajacharyas Tadasi Srimad, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki, ISKCON Samstapakacharya Srila Prabhupada Ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Sri Sri Radha Radhanath Ki, Sri Giri Govardhan Ki, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Ki, Sankirtan Yagya Ki, Gopremanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 21. Instructions by Maharaj Prithu, verse 37. Correct? 37. Let us hope for the best. Ma Jato Teja Prabhaven Mahardibis Titikshaya Tapasa Vidyaya Cha Dedipyamane Jita Devatanam Kule Swayam Raja Kulad Dvijanam Majatu Teja Prabhaven Mahardibis Titikshaya Tapasa Vidyayacha Dedipyamane Jita Devatanam Kule Swayam Raja Kuladvijanam Majatu Teja Prabhavin Mahardibis Titikshaya Tapasa Vidyayacha Dedipyamane Jita Devatanam Kule Swayam Raja Kuladvijanam Majatu Teja Prabhavin Mahardibis Titikshaya Tapasa Vidyayacha Dedipyamane Jita Devatanam Kule Swayam Raja Kuladvijanam. Ladies, never do it. Jatu, at any time. Teja, supreme power. Prabhavet, exhibit. Maha, great. Riddhibi, by opulence. Titikshaya, by tolerance. Tapasa, penance. Vidyaya, by education. Cha, also. Dedipyamane, upon those who are already glorified. Ajita Devatanam, Vaishnavas, or the devotees of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Kule, in the society. Swayam, personally. Rajakulat, greater than the royal family. Dvijanam, of the Brahmins. Translation. The Brahmins and Vaishnavas are personally glorified by their characteristic powers of tolerance, penance, knowledge, and education. By dint of all these spiritual assets, Vaishnavas are more powerful than royalty. It is therefore advised that the princely order not exhibit its material prowess before these two communities, and should avoid offending them. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Prithu Maharaj has explained in the previous verse the importance of devotional service for both the rulers and the citizens of the state. Now he explains how one can be steadily fixed in devotional service. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, while instructing Srila Rupa Goswami, has compared the devotional service of the Lord with a creeper. A creeper has a feeble stem and requires the support of another tree to grow. And while growing, it requires sufficient protection so that it may not be lost. While describing the system of protection for the creeper of devotional service, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu has especially stressed protection from offenses unto the lotus feet of Vaishnavas. Such offenses are called Vaishnav aparad. Aparad means offense. If one commits Vaishnav aparads, all of his progress in devotional service will be checked. Even though one is very much advanced in devotional service, if he commits offenses at the feet of a Vaishnav, his advancement is all spoiled. In the Shastras it is found that a very great yogi, Devasa Muni, committed a Vaishnav aparad, and thus for 1 full year had to travel all over the universe, even to Vaikuntha Loka, to defend himself from the offense. At last, even when he approached the Supreme Personality of Godhead in Vaikuntha, he was refused protection. Therefore, one should be very careful about committing offenses at the feet of a Vaishnav. The most grievous type of Vaishnav aparad is called Gaurav aparad, which refers to offenses at the lotus feet of the spiritual master. In the chanting of the holy name of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this Gaurav aparad is considered the most grievous offense. Gurura Vagya Shruti Shastra Nindanam, Padma Purana. Among the 10 offenses committed against the chanting of the holy name, the first offenses are disobedience of the spiritual master and blasphemy of the Vedic literature. The simple definition of Vaishnav is given by Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu as follows: a person who immediately reminds one of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is a Vaishnav. In this verse, both Vaishnavas and Brahmins are mentioned. A Vaishnav is a learned Brahmin and is therefore designated as Brahmin Vaishnav, Brahmin Pandit, or as a Vaishnav and Brahmin. In other words, a Vaishnav is supposed to be a Brahmin already, but a Brahmin may not be a pure Vaishnav. When a person understands his pure identity, Brahmajanati, he immediately becomes a Brahmin. In the Brahmin stage, one's understanding of the absolute truth is mainly based on the impersonal view. When a Brahmin, however, rises to the platform of personal understanding of the Supreme Godhead, he becomes a Vaishnav. A Vaishnav is transcendental even to a Brahmin. In the material conception, The position of a Brahmin is the highest in human society, but a Vaishnav is transcendental even to a Brahmin. Both the Brahmin and Vaishnav are spiritually advanced. A Brahmin's qualifications are mentioned in Bhagavad Gita as truthfulness, mental equanimity, control of the senses, the power of tolerance, simplicity, knowledge of the absolute truth, firm faith in the scriptures, and practical application of the Brahminical qualities in life. In addition to all these qualifications, when one fully engages in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, he becomes a Vaishnav. Prithu Maharaj warns his citizens who are actually engaged in the devotional service of the Lord to take care against offenses to the Brahmins and Vaishnavas. Offenses at their lotus feet are so destructive that even the descendants of Yadu, who were born in the family of Lord Krishna, were destroyed due to offenses at their feet. The Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot tolerate any offense at the lotus feet of Brahmins and Vaishnavas. Sometimes, due to their powerful positions, princes or government servants neglect the position of Brahmins and Vaishnavas, not knowing that because of their offense, they will be ruined. Majatu teja prabhaven mahardibis, titikshaya tapasa vidyaya cha, de dipyamane jita devatanam, kule swayam raja kuladvijanam. The Brahmins and Vaishnavas are personally glorified by their characteristic powers of tolerance, penance, knowledge, and education. By dint of all these spiritual assets, Vaishnavas are more powerful than royalty. It is therefore advised that the princely order not exhibit its material prowess before these two communities, and should avoid offending them. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Niravishesha Shunyavadi Paschyacha Deshatarane Vanchkalpatarubhyas Cha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Sri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Yes, so Maharaj Prithu is continuing with his instructions. Shri Radha Radhana Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So Maharaj Prithu is continuing with his instructions to the citizens, his citizens, seeing he is the king, so they're directly under him. And he's making very important point, very deep point, that despite how, well, shall we say, how in the current day people who are not royalty but people who are in government feel, and so many people, the great majority, accept that they are the topmost people. Yes, and sometimes they really try to take advantage of that and assert themselves over everybody else, and so on. These things are going on. This is just normal in Kali Yuga society. But actually, the Brahmins and Vaishnavas, but Prabhupada in the verse itself particularly actually emphasizes the devotees, the Vaishnavas. The devotees are more powerful than royalty or those in government, and they're on higher levels than those in government, and therefore those who are in government, Maharaj Prithu is saying here, they are advised, don't try and show off what a big person you are, how much authority you have, and how you can sort of push people around. Don't do that in front of the Brahmins and Vaishnavas, and just particularly be very careful to avoid offending them. And Srila Prabhupada addresses, in the first paragraph particularly, he addresses the point of how dangerous it is if one happens to offend the Brahmins and the Vaishnavas, and particularly the Vaishnavas, but also the Brahmins. In the first paragraph here of the purport, that they're very special people, they're very exalted people, and they are people who are under the particular care, particular protection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself directly. And if somehow or other you make such a mistake of what to speak of offending them, but just trying to sort of take a higher position and maybe exert some authority over them, don't do that, because you can be ruined. And all your whatever opulence, power, position, name and fame, it can just be stripped away from you just like that. I actually read, say a week or 10 days ago, just recently, very recently, about one man. He's young, he's sort of 30-ish now, but he was from Iraq, and his father was in a very high position in the Iraqi government and connected to the Iraqi military, and the Iraqi military, they had a permanent sort of security group to look after the family. Yeah, when he went to school, there were 2 soldiers with machine guns who went with him to protect him. And then the Americans, or the Westerners, particularly the Americans, totally withdrew from Iraq, like almost overnight. I mean, eventually the final stage was literally overnight. And this fellow's father kept saying to him, as things sort of went in that direction, said, no, don't worry, no, it'll come right. But then suddenly one morning, everything was just finished. And the other side, who are, on the radical side, took over. So then they decided, even his father, we got to get out of here. So they went to the airport, and what to speak of, being saluted and given special treatment. They weren't even allowed into the airport by the new government. And his father disappeared. He never saw his father again. This was, a few years ago, whenever it was. And he just managed to get out with his life and the clothes on his body. Full stop. They had been like multi-millionaires, and he got out with the clothes on his body. Just. So, no, we're not particularly into getting into modern day politics, but the principle is, a person may have a very big position materially, but it can be lost just like that. And from the top, one can find oneself right at the bottom, just practically within seconds. That's the nature of this material world. Therefore, people who in material terms are, highly positioned, they should not take their position too seriously. And they should definitely not try to be very assertive over others, and particularly over the Brahmins and the Vaishnavas. And, in the last not so many years, this has happened to a few of these people. From the top of the pile to just being crushed by the people in the pile. So this point is made here. Prabhupada makes this point that the Brahmins and the Vaishnavas, and particularly the Vaishnavas, are more powerful than royalty, even though at some point like now, it may not appear to be like that. They get bossed around to some degree by the government people. But it's not, the position is not actually like that. And one has to be extremely careful. Srila Prabhupada gives famous example from the 9th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam of Devasa Muni. Probably you're all aware of the story, or so many of you, that Devasa Muni, well, he is a Brahmin actually, and he's a very powerful Brahmin, but he tried to exert some authority over a devotee, over a great devotee, Maharaj Ambarish. And that was a mistake. He offended the great devotee Maharaj Ambarish extremely badly, actually. He offended him. And as a result, his life was turned upside down, completely upside down. He was in danger of losing his life for a year, being pursued by the Sudarshan Chakra of the Supreme Lord. And eventually he approached the Supreme Lord himself and said to the Lord that you are very merciful, you are very kind, you have a very kind heart, you are very kind to those who are suffering, and look at me, I'm suffering, running around for 1 year trying to escape unsuccessfully. But now here I am, very much distressed and disturbed and suffering from your weapon. So, I am taking very humble position in front of you and begging you, please withdraw your weapon. And the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, sorry, I can't. So, there you go. And he said that you're right, I have a very soft heart and a very merciful heart, and when I see people who are suffering, I feel for them. But there's a problem with my heart. The problem is I do not have my heart any longer, because I've given it to the devotees. And you have offended the devotee, great devotee, Maharaj Ambarish. So if you want some mercy from my very merciful heart, go and approach Maharaj Ambarish and beg forgiveness from him. And then, because he is holding my merciful heart, and he is such a person, he'll forgive you immediately. And that's what happened. That's all in the 4th chapter, basically, 4th chapter of the 9th canto, which we're in the 4th canto, so stick with us, we'll get there. Not this year, I don't know, maybe next year. But anyway, we'll get there. Hopefully within our lifetimes, and what a story that is. So yes, offenses against Brahmins and Vaishnavas are serious, but particularly offenses against the Vaishnavas or the devotees of the Lord are particularly serious. Prabhupada in the purport distinguishes, well, in the 2nd paragraph actually, Prabhupada distinguishes between a Brahmin and a Vaishnava, that a qualified Vaishnava is already a qualified Brahmin, but a qualified Brahmin who is not a Vaishnava is considerably less qualified than the Vaishnava who's a qualified Brahmin. Yes, so in other words, Prabhupada says, the Vaishnava is more qualified. The Vaishnava is a Brahmin already, whereas someone who's a Brahmin already is not necessarily a Vaishnava already. Can become, but not necessarily, unless he actually becomes like visibly a Vaishnava. So Prabhupada in the 1st paragraph really emphasizes that if one commits Vaishnava aparad, offense against a devotee, then all of one's progress in devotional service, or just all your progress in general, even materially, it can all be spoiled. It can even be ruined. And you can just be destroyed. Prabhupada talks about the 10 offenses, and he makes the point that the 2 worst offenses, the most grievous type of Vaishnava aparad is called Gurva aparad, or Guru aparad, offenses at the lotus feet of the spiritual master. Yes, so it's an interesting point. Guru aparad, which in our list, or the list of the Padma Purana actually, it appears generally as the 3rd in the list. Actually, in a sense, as Prabhupada points out here, it's a subset or subdivision of Vaishnava aparad. Because the Guru, of course, is a Vaishnava, and offenses against the Guru, of course, they're naturally a type of Vaishnava aparad. But in discussing about the 10 offenses, Srila Prabhupada makes the point that Guru aparad, although generally in the list from Shastra, from Padma Purana, is the 3rd, but actually it's a part of the first one to offend the devotees. But the thing is that amongst the devotees, the spiritual master is the most important. So therefore, to give emphasis to that point, that offense to the spiritual masters, you could say, very special and particularly dangerous type of Vaishnava aparad. Therefore, it's presented separately, as if it's, at first glance, one might think it's different. It's not Vaishnava aparad, it's something else, but it is actually a form of Vaishnava aparad, but to emphasize the importance of it, it's expressed separately in the list. So, yes. So then Prabhupada makes the point, among the 10 offenses committed against the chanting of the holy name, the first offenses, plural, are disobedience of the spiritual master and blasphemy of the Vedic literature. Anyway, there's always interesting things to learn from Srila Prabhupada. There's so many interesting things to learn, which we pick up even after many years. We pick up here and there. Yes, right. So then Srila Prabhupada goes on in the second paragraph of the purport. Prabhupada says, the simple definition of Vaishnav is given by Lord Caitanya as follows. Who is a Vaishnav? Vaishnav is a person who immediately reminds one of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. This is a Vaishnav. In fact, Lord Caitanya was approached every year for 3 years in a row by a group of devotees from a place called Kulina. And on each year, on each occasion, each year, one after the other, for 3 years, they asked him the same question. How do we recognize a devotee? How do we recognize a Vaishnav? And Lord Caitanya, each year for 3 years, answered in, well, you could say on different levels. You could say differently, somewhat differently, but really on different levels. The first time was that the Lord Caitanya answered, okay, who is a Vaishnav? And his first answer was, any person who chants the holy name of Krishna once in their lifetime, he says, is the best amongst the common people. Yeah. But he's saying he's a Vaishnava. Then the second year, same question from the same group to the same Lord Caitanya. And Lord Caitanya, so that's talking about a devotee, a Vaishnava on the lowest level. In fact, you couldn't really get lower. The only lower would be someone who's never chanted Hare Krishna at all. Then they're just sort of off the scale. They're not in the picture of the Vaishnavas. But anyway, second year, Lord Caitanya answered, that person who is always chanting Hare Krishna is the best amongst the devotees, the Vaishnavas. This is the Madhyam Adhikari. The first one is Kanishta, you could say, but he's kind of like super Kanishta, like really Kanishta. There are Kanishtas who are better. Yeah, there are definitely Kanishtas who are better than that. But at least he's sneaked in to the Kanishta level. But the Madhyam, the middle level devotees, their special characteristic is that they're always chanting the holy names of the Lord. They're always chanting Hare Krishna. Then the next year, third year, the same devotees asked the same question, and Lord Caitanya gave an answer which conforms with what Srila Prabhupada says here. Any person who, when you see them, they stimulate you to chant Hare Krishna, just by seeing them, that person, that devotee, is the best of the best of the devotees. You just see them and immediately, oh, Hare Krishna. The one in the middle who's always chanting, it may not be seeing such a devotee, may not have such an impact on oneself. But when one sees that devotee, the highest level, Uttama Adhikari, just by seeing them, just immediately, oh, Hare Krishna. Yeah, spontaneously. Yes, so then Prabhupada talks about the Vaishnavas, how the Vaishnavas are transcendental to the Brahmins. Of course, a Vaishnava is already a Brahmin, like a qualified Vaishnava is already a qualified Brahmin, and is therefore designated, Prabhupada mentions, as Brahmin Vaishnav, Brahmin Pandit, or Vaishnav and Brahmin, like this. Yeah. And there's a verse, or it's like a sutra, really. It's just a one-line statement, which, well-known statement, that when a person understands, or actually the full statement is, Brahma Janati Brahmana. One who understands Brahman is a Brahman. One who understands Brahman is a Brahman. The pronunciation has to be there, otherwise you get mixed up. So, yes, Brahma Janatiti Brahmana. It's a verse from the Vedic literatures that he or she who knows, Janatiti, he or she knows Brahman, Brahmana, is a Brahman. So Prabhupada makes the point that generally, or at least in so many cases, Brahmins who, conforming with this little sutra, Brahma Janatiti Brahmana, they know Brahman, spirit. Generally speaking, oftentimes or generally speaking, they are impersonalists. They're impersonalists. They're not just naturally devotees through understanding the impersonal Brahman. Yes, so then it takes more time and association, good association, for them to become Vaishnavas, proper Vaishnavas. So in this way, when the Brahman's understanding of the absolute truth is mainly based on the impersonal view, then they're just Brahmins. They're just Brahmins. And Devasamuni was a Brahmin in that sense, not a Vaishnava. If he had been a proper Vaishnava Brahmin, he would never have offended Maharaj Ambarish. But he did in such a terrible way. Just horrific, actually. So Prabhupada mentions the qualities as given in Bhagavad Gita of a Brahman, sort of the general qualities. Samadhamastabhakshocham shantir aujavam evacha Jnanam Vijnanam Ashtakyam Brahma Karma Swabhavajam peacefulness, self-control, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, wisdom, knowledge, and religiousness. These are the qualities by which the Brahmins work. So Prabhupada makes the point that a person may have these qualities, then he's sort of like a classic Brahmin, you could say. They're the fundamental qualifications for being a Brahmin. But then, after having those qualities, when that person engages in the service of the Lord through getting association of devotees, then he or she becomes a Brahmin, becomes a Vaishnav or a Vaishnav Brahmin. So therefore Prithu Maharaj is emphasizing to his citizens who are generally engaged in devotional service actually, that you be careful, don't offend Brahmins and Vaishnavas. And Prabhupada gives an example of how destructive that can be. That the Yadu dynasty, or some members of the Yadu dynasty, offended devotees. In fact, well, that's described in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. They offended Narada Muni, Parashara Muni, and there was a group of Brahmins, and Narada Muni, of course, is a great Vaishnav, but they offended them. The situation was that in order to make a practical joke on people and just have a good laugh at the expense of the other people, the young boys, means like teenage boys of the Yadu dynasty, dressed up one of their number, Samba actually, dressed up Samba to look like a pregnant young lady somehow or other. They did like that. And then they approached Narada Muni, Parashara Muni, and others in Dwaraka. In fact, there's a picture of it in the 11th canto. And, being cheeky and wanting to have a good laugh, they asked, what sort of child will this girl give birth to? And they were thinking, expecting that the sages would say, nice boy or nice girl or nice devotee, something like that. But you can't fool people like Narada Muni, Parashara Muni. So as I recall, it was Narada Muni, but it was one of them who responded, she will give birth to a lump of iron, which will be the destruction of the Yadu dynasty. And that shocked the boys. So they then went to Ugrasena, Maharaj Ugrasena, the king, and told him, and in fact, Samba, who's a boy, dressed as a pregnant girl, gave birth to a fairly substantial lump of iron. And they went to Ugrasena and showed him and said, what should we do with it? And Ugrasena said, well, file it down till it's like powder, and then throw it in the ocean. And, the idea was it'll just get washed away and, it's not going to be a problem. So they did that, and there was one piece left over. They just couldn't file down any further. So they threw that into the ocean, and the powder washed up onto the shore at Prabhasa Kshetra and washed onto up onto the beach, and it grew into iron rods that looked like just sort of bamboo or something. And the last, so those iron rods, the men of the Yadu dynasty went to Prabhas, and somehow or other, it's a long story, but a fight developed amongst them. Those who had fought against Krishna and Arjuna in the battle of Kurukshetra, and those who had not fought against. So they got into a fight, and they picked up these, what were actually iron rods, and started beating each other with them, and they all died. And the last piece of metal, one hunter, fisherman, I forget his name offhand, he caught it was swallowed by a fish. He caught the fish and found this thing within it and used it as an arrowhead. And that was the arrowhead of the arrow which he fired at the foot of Lord Krishna, just after all those men of the Yadu dynasty had died. So there you go. Don't offend the Vaishnava, particularly the Vaishnavas, because you can get into such big trouble that's beyond your imagination. Yes. So right. So Prabhupada concludes the purport, the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot tolerate any offense at the lotus feet of Brahmins and Vaishnavas. Due to their powerful positions, princes or government servants neglect the position of Brahmins and Vaishnavas, not knowing that because of their offense, they will be ruined. Hare Krishna. Any comments or questions? Yes, Shruti Prabhu.
Sometimes individuals put you in a position that requires big reflection on it. You find many people are thinking that they can justify all kinds of offenses. They figure they're bad. It's like, I figure he must be a criminal, so I'll plant drugs him and call the police, but because I think he's a criminal, it must be okay. And so in that atmosphere, I try to weed through it and do it just on principle. When I was only 18, I walked up to the yoga pit, and one of Prabhupada's godbrothers says to me, "So how are Jayapataka Swami and Achutananda Swami?" And he chuckles. He said, "See, I know your devotees, all of them." Then he said, "Your Swamiji," meaning Prabhupada, "should not have gone to the West without the permission of the Srimad." And I'm thinking, really, this is where he starts? And I'm thinking, I have to defend my spiritual master, but not offend his godbrother. So I thought carefully. I said, well, I'll get him to validate it rather than offending him. So I said, like the innocent child I looked like, I said, really, who started this mat? And he says, my spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. I said, oh, so he and the mat are non-different? He says, yes, but why? He sees that he sort of walked into a trap. So I said, because if he started the mat, if he's non-different and he asked my spiritual master, then he already has the permission. I said, thank you so much for helping me clear this up. So I treated it as a misunderstanding. But when some devotees were putting that you should offend Prabhupada's godbrothers because they didn't cooperate, I put this story. Some people said, oh, you would just say nothing if your mother was being raped. They said, you should have told this person he was a rascal, an offender to the guru. But not only is it offensive, but here I am, a child, and I'm at the yoga pit, and people are going to wonder, why is he offending our guru? They're not going to think that, oh, the guru must be speaking out of order. It wouldn't have helped, but I'm surprised how many people told me I didn't care about Prabhupada because I didn't accuse the person of being a rascal. But I don't think that would have accomplished the point, would it?
Yeah, right. I agree with you. I think what you did was really good, actually.
We got him to validate it because he said Bhaktisiddhanta is non-different. he can't argue against his own statement.
Yeah, right.
So I figured that was a good way, but people come up with, they make up so many offenses, things that are ludicrous. It's funny, like one person told me that Gopal Krishna Swami only manages an ISKCON because he couldn't get a job in the material world. I said, you realize that he has master's degrees in business in English and French, and he was vice president in charge of marketing at Pepsi-Cola. I think that proves he can get a job. And they said, oh, well, a master's degree in business is not important. I said, of course it is if you're engaged in business. But it's amazing the things people can come up with. After that, you'd never believe such a person. And of course, no one should invest money with them if they think a master's degree in business is not important.
Right.
You apply for the job. Any of you apply for the job of vice president in charge of marketing. So I'm amazed at some of the things that people come up with that are not only offensive, but downright stupid. But rather than offending them or going into it, it's better to just look at the practicality of it. Obviously, he can get a job.
Very good. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
That was great. Anyone? Comment? Question? Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada K.
One person told me this was about me. I said, I was there. He wasn't there. I said, he didn't comment on anything good or bad. He did there. He said, well, whatever. I said, well, you can't say whatever. If he wasn't there, you weren't there. How are you telling me what he did there?